Yes, we know genetically modified foods are everywhere. Even if these things are not bad for our health, there are other issues that you should be concerned about. That's what I'll be talking about today here at Food Facts Revealed, where we separate the facts from the fiction with a little sarcasm. Hi everybody, thanks for watching today. I'm Laura Carteret, Master of Science in Human Nutrition. So these GMO crops are everywhere, and this is my follow-up video to the first video, Genetically Modified Foods Part 1. This is Genetically Modified Foods Part 2. Ooh, clever. Okay, so anyway, these foods are everywhere. But whether or not they're good for our health or bad for our health or destroying the environment, let's just forget about all of that for a minute. Now, as I explained in my first video, there's lots of people out there trying to make you believe that genetically modified foods have been in the food supply for years and years and years, well before the early 1990s. And this is because of what is called the information war. One of the examples of this is genetically modified crops. I mean, honestly, just like 5 years ago, if you talked about genetically modified foods, everybody knew what you were talking about. You were talking about primarily genetically modified corn and genetically modified soy, which is running rampant in our food supply. Now everybody's trying to tell you, no, these have been around forever. No, they have not. As I addressed in my first video, that is a lie. Yet, if you go to my Facebook page, Food Facts Revealed, you'll see one of the comments from somebody says, these foods have been everywhere for a long time, and even the tomatoes you grow in your garden are genetically modified. No, guess what? The tomatoes anybody grows in their garden, they come out like irregular shaped and looking much different and tasting much different, I will tell you. Now, even if there was some genetic modification in those seeds, it is not like genetic engineering. Now, this is what is going on. People are trying to make you think genetic modification is the same thing as genetic engineering. So now we have to come up with a whole other term, genetic engineering or biotechnically engineered, terms nobody is even familiar with. Because why? Because there's people out there literally confusing you. And yes, it is being done on purpose. Oh, no, wait, I'm just being a conspiracy theorist because I think it's being done on purpose. Yeah, that's why the food industry told us all that they were inventing genetically modified crops in the first place. And that's why it was all over the news before these things even went in the food supply. And that's why everybody thinks that these things were somehow tested by the FDA before they went in this food supply, even though they were not tested by the FDA. If you want to know more about that, watch my first video. Honestly, people, wake up and smell the coffee. We're talking about genetically engineered crops, okay? Because apparently genetically modified means something totally different than it did when we first used the term. So genetically engineered crops, primarily the corn and soy. There is over 90 million acres of genetically modified soy growing in the United States alone. And like I said, forget about the fact that these crops require gallons and gallons and gallons of chemicals and pesticides. Just forget about that for now. Because there are other things you should be concerned about, like some of the arguments given for continuing to grow these crops at excessive amounts like they do. One of the arguments is that if we didn't have these crops, the food would cost too much money. Well, everybody's always talking about how I can't eat healthy because healthy food costs too much and processed food is cheap. Well, this is true, but did you ever think about why it's cheap? Here we are forcing farmers to buy these seeds from Monsanto. Why? Because they will yield the highest amount of crops, the most bushels of corn and the most soy plants. Okay, why does the farmer care about that? Well, because the farmer makes more money with a higher yield. The farmer does not really decide what to sell these crops for to the food industry. In fact, if it costs the farmer, let's just say hypothetically, $4 to grow a bushel of corn, they're selling it to the food industry for like $2. Yeah, people don't get this. They're like, how can that be possible, right? Yeah, it's called commodity crop subsidies, government subsidies. The government is paying these farmers per bushel of corn and whatnot. Now look, I am not an expert in government subsidies, and from what I understand, the program has changed a little bit over the last couple of years. It's been revamped somewhat. But the bottom line is this. The food scientists and all of the companies they work for who are designing these processed foods that are loaded with GMO ingredients, not to mention that these ingredients are in other products, which I'll talk about in a minute, but the fact is they are buying this stuff dirt cheap. So in a sense, yes, it is keeping our food prices down, but your tax dollars are paying the farmers to grow this stuff. So, I mean, if your taxes are paying part of the farmer's salary, and then you got to go to the grocery store and pay the food companies for the food, how much are you really paying for processed food? Then we have the argument that, well, if food wasn't cheap like this, nobody could afford to eat. Okay, give me a break. So you're trying to tell me that we live in a society where we can't afford to grow food naturally, or else nobody would be able to afford to eat. I would say if that is really the case, then there is some inherent flaw in our economic system that probably should be fixed in some way, shape, or form. Furthermore, why can't the government subsidize people who are growing organic foods or foods that don't use any pesticides or chemicals at all? Now listen, there is some incentives for farmers to cross over to organic growing, and there is now money being spent on natural forms of farming and organic farming. I just want to get that out in the open. Okay, but let's just assume for a second that, yeah, we have to have this system in place, not because Monsanto is making money off the seeds that farmers have to buy every single year, and not because that they're making money off of the chemicals that the farmers use to put on these crops every single year, and not because it has anything to do with corporate America, right? Corporate America is actually looking out for our best interests because, well, you know what? We have to feed the world. Monsanto and other people tried to tell you, well, this technology can go for real good things. Like, for example, we can create crops and foods that have higher nutrient content. And I am sure that this is very true, but are the corporations currently using the technology for this actual benefit? I think not. Let's look at golden rice. If you haven't heard about it, you can look it up. Golden rice was intended to alleviate the vitamin A deficiencies that people have in underdeveloped countries. Okay, so here are these people in underdeveloped countries where vitamin A deficiency is a serious problem. So they were going to fortify this rice with vitamin A. But there was all kinds of problem. See, one thing people have to understand is that to actually create a genetic engineered crop, it takes years and years and millions of dollars. Millions. This isn't just some science that is simplified and perfected to a T, and oh yeah, in about a year we can just get the good genetic code that we need to make more vitamin A in rice. It doesn't work that way. It takes years of research, and it also takes millions of dollars. So they have golden rice, and supposedly this is a rice that is fortified with vitamin A because of the genetic engineering that took place. However, Monsanto just decided to sell the patent to this particular crop. Why? Because it was a crock. It was a complete lie. Later, we found out that you'd have to eat something like 50 or 70 pounds of the rice per day just to reach the recommended daily allowance of vitamin A. I don't know about you, but I'm not eating 50 pounds of anything in one day. But getting back to the fact that we need these crops to feed the world, let me ask you something then. Why are like 70% of these crops being given to animals? Yeah, like all of the animals in those CAFOs, consolidated animal feeding operations that you've all heard about. Yeah, they're just eating genetically modified corn and soy by the bucketfuls. 70% of the corn grown is being fed to animals. And it's making the animals sick, quite frankly, particularly when it comes to cows who cannot eat corn. Why? Because nature didn't design them that way. But it's not just that cows can't eat corn by nature. It's literally that if they eat corn and when they eat corn, they do get sick because you're raising the acid in their rumen. So it becomes a much more acidic environment. It's no big deal until like strains of E. coli start mutating and become deadly to humans. Oh, yeah, go ahead and look that up, and you're going to get all kinds of conflicting information, even though there's plenty of scientists out there who agree that the deadly E. coli strain that has actually killed people in the United States and in other parts of the world did originate most likely from feeding cows corn. Okay, for the sake of argument, let's just say we need this system in place to feed all these animals because there would be no other way to do it. Well, in that case, what about the fact that after you make all these animals sick, particularly the cows, you have to irradiate or somehow cleanse all of the meat before you sell it because of the dangers of the E. coli bacteria? Yeah, but let's just forget about the fact that we're completely destroying the nutritional value of the meat. Yeah, I'm sure that's not affecting our health at all. God forbid we actually feed them their natural diet. Many farmers all over the United States are actually doing that and feeding thousands of people in their local communities. But I'll tell you what, let's just get back to another issue, which is the fact that these genetically modified crops were grown, put into the food supply, put into all other kinds of products, and we didn't even know about it. Nobody talked about it on the news. Nobody wrote about it in the newspaper. Of course, I think when they first started, the internet really wasn't that big, so we probably wouldn't have heard about it that way. But why didn't anyone know about it? And why does everybody think that the FDA tested these things before they put them in our food supply, when the FDA did not test these things? I think that is a real big issue. And this is one of the reasons why people have been lobbying to get GMO foods labeled. Fine, you're going to tell me that this isn't bad for my health, and in all fairness, I will say, we don't know if the actual genetically engineered crop is bad for our health when we consume it. But as I tried to point out in my first video, there's problems trying to prove whether or not it's healthy. First of all, these ingredients are predominantly in processed foods. 80% of processed foods contain a genetically modified ingredient, which makes it a genetically modified food. But these processed foods, as we all know, contain tons of sugar, oxidized fats, all other things that are not good for us. So to actually trace it to the genetic material is very difficult for any scientist. Nevertheless, let's just assume that these things are perfectly healthy. Why can't you tell me about it and let me know that it's in my food? I mean, there's lots of people who are lobbying for GMO labeling, but the food industry just totally struck it down. In California alone, 6 million people voted for GMO labeling. All they wanted was the manufacturers to put on the label, this food contains GMO ingredients, or this is a GMO food. That's all, just so that we could make our own decision. Maybe we don't think it's healthy, or maybe we don't want to find out if it's healthy, since nobody really tested this stuff before they put it in the food supply. Is that too much to ask for? No, it's not. And that in and of itself, seriously, to me, is one of the biggest problems. And I think this is a problem that many Americans don't realize. They have this impression that the FDA is keeping everything safe and testing everything. But as I explained in the first video, which you can go back and watch if you want to, this is not how it works at all. And this is well known, and it's not a secret. It's just that nobody ever tells you about this. And now, because these genetically modified ingredients literally are everywhere, it's very difficult to get away from them, because they're not just in the food supply. They're also in other products like cleaners and skincare products. They're probably in makeup. You can make a lot of different things from genetically modified corn, a lot of different chemicals. You can make surfactants and whatnot. To the best of my knowledge, anybody who is making products or food that do not contain GMO ingredients are using the non-GMO Project Seal. Look in the supermarket for things marked non-GMO. This doesn't necessarily make a food healthy. If it's a processed food, it still might contain high amounts of sugars, oxidized fats, other preservatives and chemicals that you probably shouldn't be eating. But at least you won't be supporting the growth of genetically modified crops. These crops are creating environmental hazards, and anybody who tells you they're not is lying. This is one of the reasons why insects have been completely wiped out. I mean, entire species of insects. And we've all heard about the bee colonies suffering, the honeybees. And this is a big part of the reason why. It's because of the growing of genetically modified crops. Now, in all fairness, all industrial farming does cause environmental issues, and this is a great problem that people are trying to find the answers to. But if we continue down the path of GMOs, we're never going to stop the industrial farming problems that we have now. So I don't support GMOs. I encourage people not to support the use of GMOs by not buying foods that contain GMO ingredients. We think we are powerless, but we are not. There literally is a food revolution going on right now, and you can be a part of it with the food choices that you make. Look at how the landscape of the supermarkets have already changed. We've got organic leafy greens in every single supermarket now. You couldn't find that before, just like 4 or 5 years ago. We've got all kinds of whole grains like quinoa and amaranth. And we've got all different kinds of produce now that are organic that we couldn't buy in the supermarkets before in organic form. Why? It's not because the supermarkets just decided they cared about our health. No, it's because people are demanding healthier food, as we should. Why? Because food is intimately tied to our health. Now, you would have hoped an industry that was producing a product that was so intimately tied with our health would have took their responsibility a little more seriously, but they haven't. So we have to take that responsibility into our own hands. Make better choices, people. It does make a difference, and it does matter. And the more people that buy organic and non-GMO food, the more those foods will drop in prices, because it will create a supply and demand competition in the economy. Mark my words, as consumers, we do hold a lot of power. If you got anything out of today's video, I hope you'll consider liking and subscribing. And remember, until next time, love yourself enough to eat whole foods. Eat real food.